Hi everybody, hi again. So just like the previous session, also this session is about RPA. And Kent will introduce us to this new service, which is part of Power Automate, and then do a demo of many different scenarios on using RPA in the enterprise. So over to you, Kent.
All right, thanks, Lex. Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be presenting at this conference. I always look forward to attending this conference and speaking at it in London. Unfortunately, obviously this year will be remote. Hopefully in the future I'll get to see you folks again, but I did enjoy seeing a lot of familiar faces in the chat. Today what we're going to talk about is enterprise RPA and bots in general. Just if I haven't met you before, my name's Kent Weir. I'm a principal program manager lead on the Microsoft PowerCat team. And so that's a Power Platform customer advisory team where we work with strategic customers on Power Automate and Power Virtual Agents. And then we also have some other groups that are focused on Power Apps as well. So let's go ahead, let's get started. Only have about half an hour here. Here's what the agenda looks like. What is a bot? Bots in the Power Platform. What is RPA and why should I care? And then we'll get into demos and a call to action. So bot is one of those sort of industry terms where marketers have sort of used it in many different forms. So just wanted to level set here. But in its simplest form, it's really just an application that's programmed to do certain tasks. These tasks are automated and they are generally run without a user needing to be involved. Oftentimes, they may be emulating actions that users would typically take, but the whole idea here is that they're repeatable, and as a result, the actions or the outputs are more accurate and reliable as a result. Now, we're going to talk about two different types of bots in this session. We're going to focus more so on the RPA, but I also wanted to take this other opportunity to talk a little about conversational chatbots as well. So in the context of RPA, the industry often calls these automations bots. So you go ahead and you deploy a bot and it goes and fulfills some specific function. So as we saw in the previous session by the product group, generally how you go about building those RPA bots is you want to record the task. You'll then go ahead, automate the task, and then you'll be able to play back the task. And what makes the scenarios really valuable is the ability to inject inputs or parameters, have your script run, and then be able to retrieve the outputs and to be able to then use them in downstream actions. And that's what makes this offering from Power Automate really compelling, is that the ability to bridge both this legacy world or a world where we don't have APIs with the world that does have APIs. And certainly we're going to talk a little bit more about that here shortly. Now, on the flip side, we also have this term called a chatbot. And these are conversational based. So you typically have a customer or an end user that's interacting with a bot through some sort of chat mechanism. You've all used WhatsApp or WeChat or Facebook Messenger. Those would all be examples of chatbots. But now what Microsoft has done is really democratized who can go ahead and build these chatbots. So much like we can now democratize automation, whether that's API-led or RPA-led, we can do the same thing from a chatbot perspective. And this is a new service that Microsoft has released. Now, in order to make this thing really a bot, we are able to take advantage of artificial intelligence investments, really around natural language processing or NLP. And this allows an end user to provide, say, a statement, and the bot will then try to understand what that statement is. With you, the chat maker, not having to know about every single combination and permutation of how that conversation may actually be executed. And then as a result, the bot can go ahead and respond with questions or answers, and can also go ahead and reach out to actions. And in this case, an action could be a Power Automate flow. And later in the demos, we're going to see how we can kick off an RPA bot using this process. Now, just in terms of that question from the previous session, just around like, it feels like Logic Apps and Power Automate are sort of converging. In some ways, I kind of feel like they're almost diverging in some ways, where like these are some examples of capabilities that are only found in Power Automate. So for example, you will only find the Power Virtual Agents, triggers, and actions inside of Power Automate, not in Logic Apps. And so we did see this slide before, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but just really what we're going to be focusing on in this presentation are the Power Automate side of things and Power Virtual Agents. And so these are all part of the Power Platform. And I think this is really important when you start to think about, these existing RPA vendors that do exist. They have been, in the industry for quite some time. But when you're looking for automation, I would look for more of a holistic platform perspective than just one form of automation. And I think really when you think of all of these capabilities that exist in Power Platform, that is what truly sets us apart from some other people in the marketplace. All right, so what is RPA? And so this is a quote from Gartner, and I won't read it, word for word, but I think the idea here is that you want to be able to connect with legacy systems or systems that don't have APIs, and you want to be able to move structured data from system A to system B. And so we've all heard the term before, swivel chair integration, where you start typing in one system and then you have to, alt tab into your other application, then you go ahead and start typing in that system. And so naturally, that's a scenario that is ripe for using RPA in order to automate that process and to ensure of its consistency and also just accuracy once again. Now, this is nothing new for this audience, right? You folks have done BizTalk, you've done Logic apps, you've done, probably some other integration platforms as well. Like, this is really sort of the world that we've lived in for, some decades for some of you folks. I know Stephen Thomas had a session around, the last 20 years of integration, right? And so like a lot of these concepts aren't really new, but I think just the mechanism that you actually go about just solving that problem is slightly different, right? And so I would think of RPA as really a tool in your tool belt. There's going to be some scenarios where you may not have access to an API. There might be an ERP system where they're like, no, time out, there's no way we're giving you access to the backend, right? So in that case, there might be a very viable option to go ahead and integrate or automate through the front end. And so back to the question that was in Richard's session, I do agree that RPA is a form of integration. I would say it's not the only one, but I think this is why having a very holistic platform is important so that you can truly use the right tool for the job. Now, one thing I did want to just chat about and just sort of plant some seeds, just in terms of like, you might be thinking, how would I go about using RPA? And so I believe it was last year, Daniel Toomey actually talked about agility pace layers. And so this is a Gartner concept, and there is some truth to this. If you think about how people go ahead and provision systems, you're going to have these systems perhaps known as your systems of record. These tend to be your legacy systems or your ERPs that are slow moving, but are obviously very valuable to the organization. To go ahead and modernize them may cost a lot of money and may take a lot of time. And as a result, introduce a lot of risk. And so what you start to see is that organizations will start to introduce new layers of applications in order to solve a specific business problem. Because in the meantime, business units are becoming more and more aggressive and are more interested in time to value and how quickly they can go ahead and basically capture some of that market. They can't be waiting for their system of record to be changed. And so I think this is an opportunity where we can actually take advantage of RPA. And so this is just more of a reference architecture, a project that I've been involved in the past. And so the whole point here is that we've got like our system of record, which might be our ERP, and we might have a dispatch system, and this is in the context of a field worker scenario, where this is going to be need more customization for that specific business unit. And then on top of it, you might have a system of innovation where it's like, hey, we really want to automate timesheets. And like there isn't something that exists in the market. So we want to go ahead and be able to sort of spin up a system that allows us to be super agile. But in the meantime, we still need to be able to exchange all of this data across these different systems. And so using APIs and connectors or adapters is absolutely the way you should look towards first. But there might be some scenarios where it just isn't possible to go ahead and to use those APIs or to construct those APIs. And that's when RPA could become a viable option. And so that's what I've tried to illustrate here, is that it isn't RPA or nothing. It's really finding what is the right tool for the job and then being able to leverage that. So with that said, I want to get more into demos just in the interest of time. And so I've got 3 demos for you. First, I'll just do a very quick hello world scenario. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into a timesheet scenario where I'm going to have a bot. It's a bot that conversational bot that is. I've exposed this to my enterprise. and I want to provide a self-service mechanism for folks to go ahead and submit time. Now, we've all been there. Timesheets are not fun, especially not when they're like, based on your intranet and they're like 10 years old. And so how do I go about automating some of those things? And so in this case, what we can do is we can actually use a conversational bot to go ahead and basically punch data captured in that chat conversation into our legacy timesheet application. And so there were some questions before about like architecture and sort of, is this cloud, what's on-prem, what's in cloud? And so what this illustrates here is that we do have Power Automate, which is naturally in the cloud. And this is going to be the orchestrator. It's going to orchestrate our triggers and our actions and all of our different communication mechanisms. But when it comes to UI flows, as you saw in the demo previously, like that surfaces as a connector inside of Power Automate. And then so what's happening is we're taking advantage of the on-premise data gateway that gets installed on these machines that'll actually go ahead and drive these applications. So in this case, to basically be able to access the on-prem, we have this on-premise data gateway, which we can tunnel back into the cloud and then basically push those requests down into the local data center to talk to that intranet-based application. Now, the other scenario, and I'm just doing this so I don't have to flip back and forth too much, is really just around like onboarding. And a scenario where, we've all been there, onboarding is a challenging endeavor, and you always want to automate it. And yes, you do have the ability to use Azure AD connectors in Logic Apps or Power Automate, and they're great. The problem is a lot of organizations still don't want to synchronize from the cloud to on-prem. They want to synchronize from on-prem to the cloud. And so here, what I'm just going to show you is something a little bit different than what we saw in the last session, but we're going to be able to go ahead and execute some PowerShell command line using RPA as well. And so what that allows you to do today is be able to see the Windows desktop experience, which we saw in the previous demo by the product group. And then we'll see a web-based automation using the Selenium capabilities. And then we'll also take advantage of the desktop capabilities, but in this case, going ahead and calling a command line. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into the demo itself. So we're gonna just do a very quick hello world. We saw the hello world more from a desktop perspective in the last session. I'm gonna focus more on web in this case. Here's the Power Automate Maker Portal. We've got our navigation on the left-hand side. We've got our My Flows tab, which is where you would find any of your existing automated flows. Then we also have this UI Flows tab, which allows us to go ahead and construct our UI automation. And so what I can go ahead and do is just click on New, and then I have a choice of desktop or web-based automation. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and select a web app. We're going to then be asked for a name of this flow, and then a website that we want to go ahead and launch. And just to keep things simple, we're just going to go ahead and launch Bing and just do a currency conversion exercise. So now what we're going to do is click on the launch recorder, and we're now going to get pivoted over to the Selenium IDE, where we can now go ahead and record all of our interactions. So I'm going to go ahead here and click on record. Now I'm in Bing, and I'm just going to type in 1 USD to CAD. So I want to see what is $1 US worth in Canadian. And so we can see today it's $1.35. But behind the scenes here we have Selenium IDE, which is actually recording all of those different steps. And so what we can go ahead do now is enrich the experience, because we want to be able to retrieve this value here. So we can go ahead, click on this new row, and then click on this drop down and type store a value. And then we can go ahead and use a selector to go highlight this particular value and then provide a name. And then what we can just do is go ahead and click on stop and save. And what's going to happen now is we're now getting sort of pushed back to the Power Automate portal, and we've saved that Selenium script inside the service itself. Naturally, I can go ahead and I can execute this particular automation by just clicking the play button, and it's going to run right before our eyes, and we can see that it was tested successfully. So that's cool, but that's hard-coded, so that doesn't actually make this overly dynamic. But we can go ahead and we can change that by clicking on this particular row where we've got our hard-coded currency values. And here what we're going to do is just insert some tokens that allow us to make this dynamic. And so what we can actually do is from our Power Automate that's going to call this, actually inject those values into this script so that we truly do have a dynamic experience. So now what we can just do is go ahead and click Save. I must have typed something it didn't like here. Let's see. So that was, oh, we got some issue here. So the issue was I didn't have a curly bracket. I had a round bracket. So that was the issue here. So now this is saved. I can go ahead and create a flow that will go ahead and basically execute this particular UI flow. And here I'm just going to go ahead and say insert from blank. Then I can add use this connector to surface up all of my web UI automation scripts. And here we're going to go ahead and see it in our list of UI flows. Now, in the interest of time, I am going to keep moving, but that was sort of just an initial walkthrough itself. Okay, so let's flip over to Power Virtual Agents now. And so this is a chatbot experience that we talked about before. What you can do is you go ahead and you create different trigger phrases that'll essentially wake up your bot. And then what you have is this authoring canvas that allows you to basically construct a conversation through workflow. And so historically, you would have done this probably through the bot framework where you're writing a lot of code. And certainly I've written bot framework bots before, and they're great. There's a lot of strong capabilities there. But in terms of just authoring content, it basically reduces the amount of people that have access to do that. So here we're democratizing. Anyone can go ahead and create a knowledge management bot based on like frequently asked questions. And naturally, we've got extensibility capabilities by reaching into Power Automate and even the bot framework itself. So here what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and submit a timesheet. And so I'm going to wake up this bot and just say that I want to go ahead and submit my timesheet. And so what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and basically explore those utterances and find me the right conversation that allows me to submit my timesheet. I do have the ability to log in here. And this is, I'm getting prompted and pushed to this other window because I'm in the test harness. Oh. I'm in this test harness. And I can go ahead and copy this value. This window is getting in the way. And I can just go ahead and paste this token. In a Teams experience where we've got SSO, we wouldn't actually need to actually go get that specific code. So here, yes, I do want to go ahead and submit a timesheet. In this case, I'm going to book some time to support this project type. I'm going to provide a date. I'm going to provide how many hours I want. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and we're going to kick off basically a Power Automate flow. And this Power Automate flow is now going to go ahead and drive a specific web application, our timesheet application. And so this is all being done, without any of my involvement. We're actually taking values that was from our chat session, actually enriching them by calling the Microsoft Graph, and then going ahead and executing that specific function. Now, if we go ahead and just take a look at the flow itself, what happens by logging in is we have a token for that specific user. And we can go ahead and pass that token in to Graph on their behalf in order to get their details. Because as you noticed, when I was actually in that chatbot experience, I didn't actually provide my name, but it knew who I was because it was able to go ahead and retrieve my first name and last name from graph. And then it's able to take values that were captured as part of our chat conversation and then go ahead and execute that against that web application. And so that is a web application. So that would have been recorded with Selenium. So I would have gone through a similar experience to what I showed you previously when we went through the currency demo in order to record those steps. If we flip back to our chatbot, we can see that our timesheet was submitted successfully. And then I'll have the opportunity to provide more actions. And I can go ahead. In this case, I'm just going to say, did that answer my question? Yes. And then I get provided with a survey. And so these are just some out-of-box capabilities found inside of Power Virtual Agents, where when I'm at the end of a conversation, I can just prompt the user for some feedback. And when they capture that feedback through these different emojis, I do have the ability to then go ahead and look at the overall customer satisfaction of my bot through the out-of-the-box analytics that exist. Now, one thing that I'll just show you here as well, this is how we go about calling a Power Automate flow. And once again, this is based on like the deep integration between the two services. I can go ahead and basically create a flow from this experience, or I can bring an existing flow into this experience as well. And through triggers and including different inputs, those will surface here. And now I can provide those essentially as parameters. And then naturally I can go ahead and return results and then display them as well. And so that's scenario number one. Now, the other scenario I want to talk about was around creating that user and generally how that's a bit of a pain. And so what we can go ahead and do is flip over, this is like our timesheet conversation. I can go and flip over to my service desk conversation. And here, let's say, so I'm going to sort of continue my chat here. I'm going to say, let's see, I need to create a user. And so what's happened is, like, even though I don't have, I need to create a user in my list of trigger phrases, but it was able to detect that I need to create a user is close enough to I need to add a user that it prompted this conversation to get lit up. And so here, now we're in this authoring canvas and I'm being presented with a series of options for this service desk scenario. Like, am I having issues related to software, hardware, network? I can go ahead and see existing service desk tickets. I can create a ticket if I want, or in this case, we're going to go ahead and create a user. And so we've got this debug experience where we're able to flow all of this information through the conversation. And the other nice thing is, like, I won't get prompted to be logged in again because I already have a logged in session. And so now I'm being asked for what is the person's name, the new employee's name, and we're going to say Richard Seroter. He just started a new job, so we need to get him onboarded. So let's go ahead and put in his last name. And then so what's going to happen now when I hit enter here is we're going to actually go ahead and kick off a bot. And in this case, the bot is actually running on this virtual machine inside of Azure. And we can see that it's running right now. We're just going to go ahead and execute some PowerShell, and we're passing in details about this specific conversation into this experience. And so here, what we're going to do first is we're going to create a password for them, and I've randomized that. And we can actually take advantage of the secure string capabilities inside of PowerShell. We've created a username for him and added his name and his description. We could go ahead and add roles, all of those sorts of capabilities as well. And so that process is now sort of completed from a UI flow perspective. And we can see that this user is now been created. Yeah, I've got some really weird sort of username conventions going on here, but we can see that we've created this username and that's been passed back. And so in terms of, like, what does that look like? Here we've got our Power Automate process where we're getting inputs from the bot. We can go ahead and just construct their username by just doing some substring gymnastics, create a random password, and then we're going to go ahead and pass these details over to the bot. Now, in the previous session, the team talked about attended versus unattended. I can choose that here. In this case, it was attended, and I chose attended so that you could see it. If it was unattended, it could still run on that VM in Azure, but it wouldn't be as interesting. You'd have to take my word for it that it worked. So that's why I'm choosing to use attended here. And then just basically providing a status message of success and including basically the username. And obviously we've got some exception handling as part of this as well that we can go ahead and return back to that, that conversation. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to just sort of move ahead to the call to action slide here, and then I'll take a look at some of the Q&A and see what we can do from that perspective. Just in terms of some call to actions, I do have a YouTube channel. I talk a lot about Power Platform, some Logic apps as well, so you can go ahead and find that there. In addition, if you're interested in the new UI flow capabilities, there's some tutorials available. We've got some persona-based learning for Power Automate. And then also, if you're interested in getting started with Power Virtual Agents, we do have Power Virtual Agents in a Day self-service course here that you can go ahead and take advantage at no cost. And also look for, in the near future, some similar content related to RPA in the Day from Microsoft as well. Lastly, if you is this stuff for real? Are customers using this technology? Yes, the answer is yes. Go ahead and take a look at this link. This is where we had a Coke bottlers on stage at our recent Business Application Summit, talking about their experiences with Power Automate and our RPA capabilities. So with that, really appreciate everyone tuning in and joining the session. I'm going to take a look at the Q&A here, and let's just see what questions we have here.
Yeah, there are indeed some questions. I missed it for a minute, but were you intending to show a slide with some resources?
Oh, it should be on the screen.
Because yeah, we still see the Power Automate.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, now we have your webcam, so you stopped sharing probably.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thanks for calling that out. Appreciate that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Just in terms of questions, how does it level against pure RPA solutions like Blue Prism and Automation Anywhere? So we don't get into like specific like feature by feature capabilities. I think what's important here is really to take a step back and look more holistically at the problem from an automation perspective, because we are very strong proponents of using the right tool for the right job. And what we find is when we even talk with some organizations that have RPA centers of excellence, is they're thinking about the problem from a traditional RPA perspective. And we like to think about the problem from an automation perspective and what is the right way to solve that process. So for example, in the example we saw before where you were processing invoices, if you had to go ahead and grab invoices from Outlook, like for us, we want you to use a connector. That's going to be more reliable and predictable than having to open up Outlook, then searching for an email, then saving the attachment to a network file share. Those are things that can be done in like a couple steps. And we've seen some great customer success by using this approach from a productivity perspective when they start to think about it in those terms. Let's see. Okay, so Steph Jen, what verticals do you see the adoption of Power Virtual Agents and which one is it trending? So we see it across the board. Obviously with COVID, there's been a lot of need to communicate with citizens. We've seen a lot of healthcare providers and also governments being able to use this to spin things up really quickly. We've also seen just a lot of uptick in just like, just customer service scenarios. We have an NFL football team that's using this technology. We have their publicly referenceable customer, Coca-Cola, that's using this in terms of like interfacing with their customers. So I would say like anytime you've got like a business to consumer scenario where you want to provide rich customer service, Power Virtual Agents is a great tool. You can obviously use it internally for internal scenarios as well. We do see that, but we also see probably bigger bang when people are focusing on how to provide better engagement with their customers. So there's a question just around the data gateway and some legacy platforms and just performance latency issues and increased egress cost. And so these, in the case of egress, like this is using the on-premise data gateway that exists today. So we're obviously seeing customers use this in a variety of different use cases, whether that be Power BI, Power Apps, Logic Apps in some cases. I would say to help address some of these concerns, we do support this notion of clustering, right? So you can go ahead and scale your bots out to multiple machines by using a gateway cluster. And we've seen some good success with this with customers too, where they were actually able to get more throughput from using this gateway cluster than they have with their traditional RPA solutions. In this case, they were able to process 6 times the amount of invoices by using the gateway cluster over conventional means. So I think that would be one way to go ahead and to mitigate that. So do you need to install Selenium IDE? So that is something that you do need to install. When you go ahead and try to use the feature for the first time, it's going to ask you to go ahead and download the UI Flow app. But there's also going to be a prompt that says you need to install the Selenium IDE extension. So you need to make sure those are enabled on your web browser that you're going to be using to go ahead and sort of design and build your automation, but also when you go ahead and execute it on, say, a remote machine. So Lex, are we out of time?
Well, officially yes, but I think you can take 1 or 2 questions.
Okay. So I guess a question for, do you consider RPA as integration? I feel, I kind of mentioned this before, I feel it's a tool in the tool belt. I don't think it's the be all end all, but I think I really like the vision that Microsoft has around like using the right tool and the ability to use connectors when you can, and when you can't, use RPA to basically enrich those scenarios and really go after some of the long tail integration. And I think the other thing with it is that it can be more approachable. Now, not every RPA platform is super approachable for democratized access, but I think knowing Power Automate and sort of the things that we've built to date and how we're democratizing access to those automation tools and capabilities, the same thing is going to happen with RPA. And RPA is going to get easier to basically build and execute as a result.
Yeah, let's indeed take the last question so people have time to move over to the next session.
So there was one question around additional languages support. I'm assuming this is related to PVA, Power Virtual Agents. Yes, look for that very shortly. We've entered some private previews with some languages with respect to PVA. So there is documentation that does exist around our roadmap. And so look for that shortly.
Fantastic. Yeah, I believe on the pending side, there's still one question pending. So maybe you can have a look at that when we have closed this session. But for now, indeed, yeah, thanks for this session. Well, good examples. So I think it was also quite attractive to the people. So yeah, thanks for this. And
yeah,
indeed, all the attendees, well, our next session is about to start, or at least you can join it. And that session will be about Event Hub. So we will meet you there.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Kent.
Covey.co